Thank you, Felicity. And going to Rushanara, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Minister. So I want to come back to tax avoidance and the government's strategy. Obviously, the government's done a great deal, as you've said, to clamp down on tax avoidance. And from your answers and Siobhan's questions, it's clear there's a lot more to do, and I hope you'll agree with that. But in terms of some of the recent changes, the government's decided to not stay with the EU-wide avoidance disclosure rules, Directive DAC 6, and many would argue, including those working in the sector, that that's weakened the ability of HMRC to tackle tax avoidance. Why was that done? Because from our checks through clerks on this committee, the parliamentary lawyers have said that it's not down to the FTA. There's no grounds for coming out of it based on the agreement that's been made, trade agreement that's been made. Can you explain why this has happened?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to be clear what's happening here. Nothing has changed in our commitment to international tax transparency. We are absolutely as committed to it as ever have been, if not more so. It's vital if we're going to get hold of issues of avoidance and evasion across borders. We're very clear about that. The second thing is that DAC 6 is an EU directive, which requires tax authorities to collect and exchange information. So we have left the EU. We are therefore not in a world in which it applies to the UK. And what we are doing instead is implementing the OECD equivalent, which are called the mandatory disclosure rules, as soon as we can. Now, that was agreed in the FTA, and it has the effect that it orients us towards a global rather than an EU standard, which in a way is appropriate because we're no longer part of the EU. But I don't think there's any reason to think that it is a less stringent standard. It's a somewhat different standard, but I don't think there's any reason to think that where it applies, it's a less stringent standard.
Right. You don't think there will be any barriers to Britain being a leader? Some would argue that it would actually damage our leadership role in relation to this agenda. You don't agree? We can count on you and your colleagues and HMRC to do more than what's happening already, to be better.
Well, the way the OECD rules work is that they focus on evasion, and they are narrower than the EU rules, but they are more global. In fact, they are global in their scope, whereas the EU rules only apply to reporting of EU arrangements. So you have got a situation in which we are stepping into a global framework. I think the point I would make is that fits very well alongside some of the core work that we're doing at the moment, notably the existing reporting regime we have called DOTAS, the Disclosure of Tax Avoidance Schemes. So in a way, those two things dovetail together. I mean, what's ultimately going to make the difference in this area is a continued resolute focus on avoidance and evasion. And you will have seen that we've put into place or have announced a huge amount of work, including work on promoters and work on avoidance itself. So that is quite a lot of just domestic activity that we are working on, irrespective of what's happening on the OECD side.
Okay, Minister, I've got a few more questions, so I would appreciate some quick fire answers. So just coming back to the domestic front, the NCA estimates that about £100 billion of money is laundered through Britain annually. The recent FinCEN report leaks named 3,267 UK incorporated shell companies, and nearly 70 billion flowed from Russia into the UK's overseas territories. So I appreciate all the things you're saying, and this committee's looked at through previous inquiries some of the work that's been done. But this is clearly a big problem still. Do you think that we need to do more in terms of introducing criminal offences, such as those proposed by Dame Margaret Hodge, along with Andrew Mitchell and others, cross-party efforts to try and do more around this agenda. Because it seems to me that while some progress has been made, these numbers are pretty staggering, are they not? Well, and if you look at the US, for instance, we don't do very much. We don't do enough on the criminal prosecution dimension.
I mean, first of all, in general, there is no doubt that tax avoidance and evasion continues to evolve, and there's always stuff we need to do to try to rein it in. I suppose the point I'm making is that we've been extremely active historically, and we continue to be extremely active. On the point you raise about the suggestion that Margaret Hodge and Andrew Mitchell put forward, I actually did a public meeting with them to go through their proposals and discuss them in detail. And I think it was fairly clear, and there was expert testimony taken to that as well as ministerial input. I think it was clear that those proposals do not work as they presently stand. And there's a general problem with these ideas, which is a classic problem of politics, which is it feels wonderful in principle, but it turns out to be very hard, if not impossible to implement. And let me just explain for a second the problem. The problem is that when you are proposing to apply a criminal standard, you are applying a standard that is much, much higher than the one you would find.
Minister, with respect, can you just explain how the Americans managed to do it and we failed to? Let's leave the European Union to one side for a moment, because you've explained your reasons why we can't follow the Europeans on this. Why is it that we don't manage to prosecute in the way the US manages to? Why are we behind? What can we do to improve so that we can address this 100 billion NCA number that I'm talking about? What are you going to do? If the Hodge-Mitchell amendment and efforts are not good enough, what is it that you're going to do to bear down on these numbers and address it?
So two or three things. I mean, I don't know the 100 billion number, but let's just leave that for the time being. There's no doubt there's a problem here. Rushanara, we're already doing a lot. We have more work underway. And so this is an area, if you look at the amount of work that's been done over the last 18 months on tax avoidance and promoters, it is a vast increase in an acceleration, a direction we're already heading in, and that's good. But let me just say one thing, which is that I can't comment on the US legal system, and there are many aspects of the US legal system which I think you would certainly many people would think were not ones that this country ought to be following. And I will say that when it comes to the rule of law, this country invented it, and I don't think it's got anything to learn from many other countries. I mean, I'm not saying we can't learn. I think we could learn in many ways, but I think in general, this is the place where people tend to go for, high quality, consistent legal judgments.
Well, look, I think that we should be open to ideas and learning from many different countries,
whether it's the
European Union or the global South. Actually,
I agree, but I don't think.
I think it's the arrogance to not try to learn. Now, I just have one final question.
No, hold on a second. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't try to learn. I'm saying we should be conscious of the historic achievement of the UK as a rule of law society.
Look, I started my session with acknowledging the work the government has done on this. So there's absolutely no question that your department and your colleagues have done some considerable work. That said, there's some outstanding areas that we need to focus on. So just moving on, as I suspect we're not going to get much further on this. Just in relation to just on COVID, in relation to COVID, we know from some of the recent numbers that there has been about £3.5 billion of fraud and error in payments that HMRC has identified. Would you be able to give us an update on what's happened with that and how much of that has been recovered, and what steps your department working with HMRC will do to recover some of that money, or most of it, I hope?
So the HMRC publish and will continue to publish updates as to the level of fraud that they estimate there may be in the system, and the level of recoveries that they have made. And of course, don't forget, match this may not be fraud, it may be error, people inadvertently applying for things that they didn't intend to, or not realizing that rules made it impossible, etc. And we have some further rules. I can inquire if HMRC have got, which is an independent institution, as you know, and an autonomous one can update you on that area. What I would say is that HMRC have got fraud and error guidelines for the existing schemes, and those are ones within which, as far as I'm aware, the schemes are operating, and it is testimony to their effectiveness that they've been able to get these schemes out and as effective and as large scale as they have been, while keeping the fraud and error within known and manageable limits.
Beth, I think Beth wanted to come in quickly. Beth,
just one very quick point on. I'm not sure I recognise the 3.5 billion. It may be that that's the extrapolation of what HMRC's planning assumption is for fraud in the furlough scheme, which is 5 to 10%. I just wanted to emphasise that that's a planning assumption. That is not the amount of fraud that they have identified. It is their assumption for what, based on the policy, and they think the amount of fraud might be, and they are planning their work around that. But that is not the amount of fraud that they have identified at this point.
It would be great to get an update on all of this. And Minister, thank you very much for offering to come to this committee regularly. We're not sensing the same enthusiasm from the Chancellor, so if you could have a word with him, because this committee is feeling rather neglected by the lack of attention from the Chancellor. So I hope he can come. I'm sure you're aware of the chair writing to the Chancellor about.
I haven't been aware of that, but I haven't been aware of that. But you've made your point.
Okay, right. At that point, we'll move on. Rushanara.